conversation that is part of a much bigger process of racial dialogue and transformation. We do not want this to be the focus of anyone's attention in terms of the goings-on of the last week and what precedes. We, as the people who will be speaking up here, are individuals, we are not experts, and we don't want to claim authority over that. What we say is based on readings and discussions with black students and writers, and views that we think are probably important for a lot of people to hear. So we want to emphasize that we want to create a safe space here for discussion. We want to create an open space for discussion, and we want people to feel comfortable to air their views. The way that we want to persuade people here is not to shout them down, not to heckle them, but rather to persuade them through open discussion so we can recognize common humanity. The definition of black people that we're going to be using in this discussion is a broader black consciousness sense of any person oppressed by a racial hegemon. So we're not talking about a specific ethnic group or a specific cultural group. We're going to give some terms and ideas to start off this discussion. People will come here at the front and define some key concepts and understandings so we could, when we have an open discussion, we can all be talking about the same thing and not be talking at cross purposes. After we've opened it up for that discussion and everyone's been able to have their say, we're then going to close for a short conclusion. We just want to emphasize that because we don't have much time, we have a lot of people who are all going to want to speak. The contributions need to be short and concise, and we hope that you respect the floor and respect other people in the room by trying to keep your contributions brief. We also want to emphasize that whilst this is an event on white privilege and is mostly directed at educating white people, it is certainly not limited to contributions from white people. So we open contributions to anyone in this room that feels that they have a valuable contribution to make. We encourage everyone to have their say. And to just emphasize that that safe space and that safe dialogue can only happen if we have a sort of cooperative environment from everyone here. So thanks. I'm just going to hand over now to our next speaker.
Okay, I'm going to begin by offering you an explanation of the term white privilege, which has been quite prominent in recent discourse. If we refer to Wikipedia, white privilege describes social privileges that benefit white people over and above what is commonly experienced by black people. Basically, it's an invisible package of unearned benefits that are conferred to every white person at birth. These benefits include greater freedoms to work, move, access resources, and speak freely. It is the cultural affirmation of one's worth because of one's race. Being white, I can underperform without having people attribute this to my race, consciously or not. And when I excel, no one questions whether I attained that performance through affirmative action. Authority figures are likely to share my skin color. In media and films, people of my race are widely represented. My home language is one in which the majority of commerce, education, and the media is conducted in. Employees and clients will tend to assume that I'm educated and competent simply because of my accent. I do not feel pressure to abbreviate or change my name because a certain demographic finds it hard to pronounce it. And lastly, I will not, well, not lastly, but I will not be called upon in discussion to represent the opinions of my entire race. This last point, is important as it highlights the problematic feature of white privilege in that it confers the right to white people to assume that their experiences are universal and the norm, whereas the experiences of others are abnormal and exceptional to that norm. Because of this assumption, white people tend to assume that these undue benefits bestowed upon them are universal to all, and that we live in a just society. It is easier to assume this because our exposure to racial oppression is merely through testimony. It is easy to assume this because we never experienced the hardship of racial oppression firsthand. Because of this, the reality of institutionalized racism in this country and white privilege are kept invisible to many who are white. The existence of white privilege is most clear to those who do not recognize that they have white privilege. Because it is a privilege reserved only for whites who can choose to deny that being white has certain advantages in this society. White privilege is a phenomenon that is continuously denied or protected by the majority of white South Africans. Many feel like they're being victimized when they are asked to acknowledge and interrogate their privilege, or they feel like they're accused of being racist. I'd like to conclude by making the point that one doesn't have to be an explicit racist in order to benefit from and perpetuate white privilege. I think this misconception comes from the idea that in my class and racial group, I'm taught to not see myself as racist because I'm taught to recognize racism in the acts of individual aggression of members of one group to another. I'm not taught to see it in the manner in which it is most oppressive, in the institutionalized systems that confer power to one group above another. These systems make us all party to oppression and privilege, which we perpetuate through our complacency and denial of these injustices. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about intersectionality. Intersectionality is the idea that everyone's identity is made up of several components, and together, all these components influence how you experience the world and how the world views and treats you. No one experiences the world solely by their whiteness, or womanness, or their education. Guys, comments off. Several different facets make up my identity. It's hard to separate them because my experience is at their meeting point. Each of these facets of identity is either privileged or oppressed, and together they contribute to my positioning in society. Race is only one aspect of identity. Often, racial privilege is conflated with economic privilege. It's important to remember that these are not the same thing. However, because of our history, apartheid and globally, it is really hard to separate them. White people are favored economically, overwhelmingly, and it's impossible to deny this. Undeniably, being white is a privileged racial identity. This does not mean that all white people experience privilege to the same extent. Some white people are more privileged than other white people. This is because race is not the sole determination of your privilege. You have to include gender, sexuality, education, location, class, the list goes on. This means that from an intersectional approach, it is possible for a white person to be less privileged than a black person in some aspects. However, being white is still a privileged racial identity. It's important to remember that one of the most considerable aspects of identity is race, because just like gender, it's impossible to hide and easy to segregate people by. It's important to acknowledge the aspects of identity that are privileged and oppressed. It is essential to be cognizant of the historical oppression these aspects of identity carry. It is vital to check your privilege.
I won't be speaking long. I just think that it's really important for all of us to kind of understand the idea of institutional racism when we're having this discussion, because it's a word that's been used a lot. So I think a good point of departure is to say that institutional racism does not mean that everyone within the institution is racist. What it does say though is that the institution perpetuates a system of inequality that is based on race. So I think that's really important for all of us to kind of understand and grapple with. So UCT is institutionally racist. This does not mean that everyone at UCT is racist, although many are. Thank you for attest to that. What it does mean though is A, UCT creates a space where a white person is made to feel more comfortable than others. It also promotes a space where it is easier for white students and staff to achieve success. So I think the conversations around symbolism and namings of buildings and the statue is really important when you think about this. You need to think about how UCT perpetuates white students and black students' identities within the artwork and the statues and the names of buildings on campus. The symbolism is quite a passive way, but I think it's really important for all of us to acknowledge that UCT actively perpetuates institutional racism. And this is done through a few ways. One of them is that the exit surveys done of all the staff that leave, past staff and academic staff, that leave UCT, most of them attest them leaving to A, they did not feel comfortable in this space, and B, they did not feel like they had any upward trajectory. UCT has failed to meet its employment equity standards for the last 10 years. We have an admissions policy that claims redress. However, our targets in every faculty favor white students by the hundreds, which is really important to note. Senate, which is the major decision-making body of this campus, has 270 members, most of which are white males. This means that the entire institution decisions and way forward is determined by that of white males. So I think that this is really important to understand the difference between racism and institutional racism, specifically within this conversation and within this context. Thank you.
The topic that I'm going to briefly discuss is about supposed anti-white racism, what people call reverse racism. I think it's a necessary discussion once you think about white privilege and the structure of the society that we live in. What I hope to achieve by the end of this is to persuade you that while it's possible for white people to experience prejudice, it is impossible for a white person to experience racism. Black people cannot be racist towards white people. Racism is not a two-way street. So, to begin, think to yourself about what examples come to mind when you think of racism. Unless you're a very unusual person, you probably think of apartheid, the transatlantic slave trade, or colonialism, or police brutality in the United States, or somewhat differently, something like anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. What do these examples have in common? Apart from overwhelmingly being about the oppression of people of color by white people, they are also about the subjugation of a group of people by another group of people. When you think of racism in practice, that is, we look at the historical record of racism, we see that it is inextricably linked to power and oppression, and this is what makes it so terrible. We cannot divorce it from this context. Simply, black people cannot be racist because they live in a society where they do not have the power to oppress white people. So, whites can experience prejudice, right? It is perhaps possible for someone to have an unwarranted hatred of white people, and we can call that prejudice. But we cannot compare this isolated prejudice with the systematic, unavoidable, ever-present racism and discrimination that black people face in society like ours. If a black person calls me a stupid white, right, it's simply not such a big deal, right? Unlike calling a black person a stupid black, it does not tie into and reinforce a system and 1,000-year history of me being oppressed. Calling me a stupid white is insulting and unkind, but it doesn't mean anything more than that. We cannot compare the experience of a white person experiencing prejudice and a black person experiencing prejudice. They are qualitatively different phenomena. Black people cannot be racist towards whites. This is what many black thinkers who study racism and experience racism and write about racism identify. They recognize that racism is about power. We had a bunch of quotes, we took them out in the interest of time, but you can easily read up about this. Only white privilege allows someone to look at the history of racism and not see that it is linked to oppression. Only someone who doesn't have to think about power relations can see this history and say that racism is essentially arbitrary. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of what racism has always been about and what makes racism so much worse than, for example, someone being prejudiced to me because I'm skinny or have long hair or I'm shaven. Racism is prejudice and discrimination against a group, and it's a racial group when we're talking about racism, which is oppressed as part of that oppression. In South Africa, this necessarily means that white people cannot be victims of racism as white people are not oppressed. The most common reply to this is that the dictionary definition doesn't agree with this. Well, whose perspective does the Oxford English Dictionary represent? Why should you prefer a definition coming from British people in Oxford on racism compared to definitions of the most brilliant and nuanced black thinkers of our times who have examined and experienced racism? So what are the implications of this? Firstly, recognize that prejudice we might face as white people is not such a big deal, and certainly is not at all comparable to the prejudice and discrimination that black people face. Do not call anti-white prejudice racism. A necessary implication also is recognizing that the formation of black-only student groups or black-dominated events is not racist. It cannot be when the structure of our society is so favored towards whites. In fact, the formation of these groups does not even constitute anti-white prejudice. A movement which is about fighting white supremacy and giving black students some control over their environment necessarily means whites taking a back seat and giving black students space to control things. Dan is going to speak about this a bit more in the next section, but I'm just going to end with one quote from the person our student union building is named after, Steve Biko. Okay, he says, "Those who know define racism as discrimination by a group against another for the purposes of subjugation and maintaining subjugation. In other words, one cannot be a racist unless he has the power to subjugate. What blacks are doing is merely to respond to a situation in which they find themselves as objects of white racism. We are in this position in which we are because of our skin. We are collectively segregated against. What can be more logical than for us to respond as a group?
So I'm the last speaker, and then we're going to open the floor up. In one thought train or argument, I'm going to be speaking about 4 things. The first one is the myth of white objectivity. Second one is white arrogance. Thirdly is black rage and the policing of it. And the 4th one is the concept of allyship. All right. So one concept that many people misunderstand is that the problem with speaking about experiences that you have never had on behalf of those who have had those experiences. Simply put, the argument is that there are factors of one's person or identity that governs how they are treated and so affects their lived experience. If someone does not have that element or factor, they cannot speak for what it is like to experience that treatment because they have never experienced it. This is true of men speaking about what it is like to be a woman in matters of feminism. It's true of an enabled person not knowing what it is like to be disabled. And it is true of white people speaking for what it is like to be black. In each case, they cannot fully know or speak for what it is like to experience that oppression that those groups that they are not a part of feel. So there's a significant problem with what we can interchangeably be called white arrogance and the myth of white objectivity. This is the implicit belief that white people are better sources to confirm whether black people are racially oppressed than black people. How absurd does that sound? The assumption is that there is something about white people that renders us capable of objective access to all knowledge and insight to speak truth about anything, even when it is clear that we do not have any access to that information. This is the myth of white objectivity, and it is a deeply racist one because it assumes that only white people, as distinct from other races, have this ability. To invert the concept, do you as a white person believe that a black person is a better authority to tell you what it is like to be white than you? Probably not. The inverse is the myth of white objectivity. White arrogance is the attitude of people who hold this belief of white objectivity. So how does this play out? In the last week and a half, many people have described the protests as instances of black rage. This means people who still experience racial oppression based on skin color, voicing their pain and fury at the continued injustice of the status quo. Many white people have sought to police black rage by using the myth of white objectivity to berate black people for their anger. By telling black people what it is like to be black and telling them how they should feel and act, you rob them of their voices and you belittle their experiences. You cannot know, but you speak for and to them as if you know better than they do. You once again occupy space and attention as a white person. Implicitly, you say that they are incapable of knowing or expressing the truth of their lives, or that they are simply lying about it, or both. Even if you're on the side of black people, speaking for them and trying to lead their protests and movements for change robs them of their autonomy and speaks in the place of their authentic testimonies, which silences the very black voices that you seek to emancipate. But all of this begs the question, how should white people engage with black people without shutting down black people's rare opportunity for expression in a racist society which marginalizes their voices every second of every day? My answer is this. In every single interaction, as white people, our point of departure should be an assumption of the authenticity and truth of black people's testimonies. This is not an unreasonable or crazy assumption. We do it all the time, every time we talk to anybody. We do not assume that they are deluded or lying or wrong about their own lives. It seems insane that we suddenly do it because a black person dares to say that we are still privileged. Alright, so after that, we use this assumption as a true premise for the thoughts, discussions, and arguments that we have. So we can still critically engage, right? We can still have opinions. We can still disagree on things with black people, so long as we do not speak for or ignore black people. Finally, we should not lead or be significantly involved in black movements beyond something people call allyship. Recognize that even the physical presence of a white person changes the dynamic, because even if you are supporting the movement with all of your best intentions, you are complicit in the hegemony and in the oppression through your privilege. And so your very presence causes pressures that silences, distorts, and places secondary black people's voices. This is true of men as allies in feminism too. It's true of straight people as allies of the LGBTQIA movement. Rather, let's do allyship. So what does allyship mean? And this is what I'm suggesting as a point of departure for this discussion. Acknowledge that you don't and will never get it. You will never fully understand what it is like to be black. Support quietly in the background of a march, for example, or listen to try to understand as best you possibly can in the acknowledgement that you will never get it. Black people have been forced to listen to what it is like to be white for long enough. It is time for white people to start listening and speaking to white people so that more will listen. Because what the one thing that the last week and a half has shown us is that white people cannot ignore white voices as easily as they seem to be able to ignore black voices. And that's the particular power that white people have in a white community that is racialized to ignore the demands and voices of black people trying to speak to that community. Alright, so engagement. I'm going to be chairing this discussion. I invite everybody with ideas to discuss issues with what we have stated, other issues that we have not mentioned. I ask you to keep it succinct. I ask that it will be a maximum of 1 minute. We're going to be timing you. I'm going to be giving maybe a 5 or 10 second warning if you're straying towards the end of your time. Understand that this is not specifically a response to what you might understand as a panel discussion. This is a discussion amongst everybody here. You can either come to the front, I'll take a set of 4 offerings that are around, and you can come to the front and use a microphone, or you can speak from where you are, and I will use that before we open this discussion. I really hope that what we have said is not preaching to the choir. And this is really important, because for too long, many people, black and white, have sat comfortably in our own bubbles, quiet preaching to people who we know we are safe expressing our opinions to because they agree with us, or at least they don't dare to disagree. This safety, this quiet preaching, is 3 contemptible things. The first one it is self-congratulatory. The second thing that it is passive. And the third that it is impotent. None of that is allowed in the space that we have currently created. This is a space for new, constructive, manageable, respectful engagement between people who need to start talking, because half of UCT's community is these people, and we have not been talking. All right, so hands please.
Okay, sorry.
All right, we're going to allow 1 initial contribution.
Okay.
Thanks so much. I'm sorry guys to kind of disrupt this. This is an appeal to black students. I'm making an appeal to black students, and I see a lot of black students in the room. And this is entirely up to you, but I come here asking black students to leave the space. I'm asking this especially because we've had a lot of debates of the place of white people in black power movements. And we've all agreed that the place of black, one of the places of white people is to conscientize their own people. What we need to recognize is that we need to leave this space open for white people to engage with other white people, without having us to kind of object to anything that's being said in this space. If someone's being problematic, Dan's here to deal with them, Jessica's here to deal with them, everybody who's presented is here to deal with them. If you do decide to stay in the space, I ask that you not ask any question, you don't heckle, or you don't disrupt the space, because we need to make sure that this process happens. If we're going to agree that the space of white people is to educate other white people, we need to allow that process to take place. And we need to do that without having our contribution. We can't keep complaining that it's tiring for black people to educate white people, but when white people try and do it, we disrupt them. So this is an appeal. I'm asking all the black students to leave this venue. If they don't want to leave the venue, I'm asking that if you do stay, you don't ask any questions, you don't give any comments, and you allow the space to be an interaction between the white students. Thank you very much.
And I'd just like to make one clarification on that, is that the organizers of this do not take a position. It is completely out of line for white people again to tell black people what to do in this venue. So that was a particular...
And that's why I needed to come to it.
You're right. So that's a specific appeal from Marset to black students. Take it as you will. I think we should recognize people's autonomy. Okay, again, 4 questions I'll take. You can either come down to the front and use the microphone, I'll make an order, or you can speak from where you are, it's up to you. Alright, you sir are going to be number 1, you can come down if you like. Hands, you sir can come down if you like. Do you want to speak now? Okay, come down. 4th, anyone? Are there any more hands? Come on down. Alright, so can I ask again for respect and to give your attention so that everybody can contribute in a way that has got no power imbalance marginalizing anyone. Let's conduct this properly. Alright, you got 45 seconds to a minute and I'll tell you. Okay.
I just have a question to ask in terms of like what my position is as a black person who has experienced privilege, and whether or not I'm allowed to engage in this debate. So often, many people who are black and who are angry don't want to talk to me or to listen to me because they think that I cannot understand anything that they've experienced, which is probably true about lots of this stuff. But I still am black and I have experienced racism. So I wonder where my place is. I wonder if we've ever thought about that.
Thank you. I think you turned it down. Obviously the next round of questions is where there can be direct responses from the audience. Cool, 1 minute.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm just going to read this because I understand that I have quite a strict time limit and I don't want to veer off on a tangent. So I think what I'd like to talk about is a sinister aspect to white privilege, which I think that some of us have been aware of and maybe haven't been able to language. I came across a brilliant man called Rick Turner who puts this aspect of white privilege in a very good way. And he talks about the process of dehumanization of white privilege. And upon self-reflection, and to speak to a point that was mentioned earlier, in that privilege is undeserved. And because of that, it is a product that of a society that was systematically favored to a particular group and disadvantaged another. Now, when we realize this, eventually there's a cognitive dissonance because our self-congruence has been challenged in the idea that we want to believe that the world is fair and that we are good. And now, the quest to alleviate this dissonance, we can resolve in a number of ways, but there's one that I want to draw attention to, and that's what Rick Turner talks about, in that if you accept the premise that your privilege is deserved, then you must accept that the injustice of the past was not in fact unjust, and your life is in fact more meaningful or important than another's to justify your position without any sense of guilt.
10 seconds.
In this case, you deny the quality that the other is a human too, but you also deny a common sense of humanity. And in taking away another person's human status, you make yourself something else.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. So I actually only came here like half an hour ago when I actually heard about the talk. And I just want to ask you guys a couple of questions. Who here is white? Raise your hand. Okay, cool. Who here is black? Raise your hand. Who here, I know this is quite a personal question, is straight? Raise your hand. Who here is bisexual? Raise your hand. Who here is gay? Raise your hand. And finally, I want to say, who here is human? Raise your hand. And I really hope that one day, when we have talks like this, we don't refer to them as a white person or a black person. We refer to them as a human. So next time when someone says, you stupid black or you stupid white, just call them stupid. Thanks, guys.
So I'm going to slightly take issue with what was just said, just because I think one of the problems relating to white privilege is that our generation of, especially white people, have been raised on this non-racialism nonsense. Okay, I think it's actually an issue that a lot of people who aren't racist just believe too much in non-racialism and therefore don't get to acknowledge their white privilege. And what I want to put the emphasis on, because it wasn't done it was deliberately, but there was no emphasis on this in any of the talks really. Practical action, what can you do? Well, everyone here who's white, like me, probably you're a lot like me, you have a lot of white friends, and probably a lot of them are either racist or completely in denial about their white privilege. Okay, for each person here, there's another 30 or 40 of your friends outside, okay? So all you need to do is start talking to these people about these things, right? I think that's super important. All of us can go out and have lots of conversations with lots of people discussing these concepts, and that's already a very, very big big start to making a difference.
Alright, hands. Okay, 1. 2 at the back. 3. Yeah, sure. 4.
Hi guys, really trying to handle this in case you know that, which you obviously didn't. I would just like to say that from a privileged white perspective, and when I speak to other privileged whites, and a thing that we as white privileged people don't understand is we forget to actually research what we know. We say, oh, these black people, they don't know this, because we've been brought up like that. But talking to people, I'm under the impression that no one actually reads and knows and has the background knowledge to support their arguments, especially now talking about the Cecil John Rhodes. You talk to white people and they're like, how dare they take the statue down? I support them taking the statue down because I have learned, firstly through what the black people have said, because I've been able to listen to them, and through my own research that yes, he was probably not the greatest person that lived on this planet. And basically what I'm trying to say is, as white people, we need to know what we're talking about when we debate these things, and we also need to understand that there's more than just what we think we know because we are privileged, and we shouldn't just take that for granted. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca, and I just wanted to address the girl who spoke earlier asking if she had a place in this discussion. And just from my perspective, I completely think you do, because I don't think, whilst I think there is a hegemonic form of privilege that white people are a part of, I think that there are a lot of nuances in privilege, and I think that's an important part of intersectionality, which was mentioned earlier, which is looking at how all these different privileges interplay with how you are marginalized at the same time. So I completely think that whatever contribution you would have, and anyone who also feels like they might be privileged even though they are marginalized because of their race, and I think this is most commonly expressed through education in South Africa in terms of that kind of dynamic. I think you definitely I have definitely ears that I want to listen to your contribution, and definitely think there is space, and that just should be encouraged. Yeah.
There's a guy at the back. Alright, he's gone.
Well, I just got one question for one of the speakers. Sorry, I don't know what your name is. You spoke about there's no such thing as racism against white people. And your main reason was that we live in a society where black people do not have the power to oppress white people. And I'm not asking you this like aggressively, I just genuinely want to know what makes you think that.
Yeah, so I encourage that. I definitely encourage interactions on the ideas that we had, because again, this mustn't be quiet preaching. So I'm going to allow a response, and then I'm going to take 3 more as part of our next touch of 4. So please raise your hands again if you have any questions, arguments, disagreements. 1, 2, 3. Maybe not more white men. Like you guys are making this incredibly difficult for me. 4.
Next round.
Yeah, everyone come down, you can speak.
I think, so there's a couple of things. The first thing is to say that the experience of racism is not just about current oppression, but it's also about a history and a legacy of thousands of years of identifying power relations and how people interact. But more importantly than that, I think if we look at the society that we're living in, we can see that white people have far more privileges than black people. And we live in a society which seeks to appease white people. So, for example, that rally the other day that was on Thursday, the really big rally, there were lots and lots of black students with their hands up, but we kept on saying, can more white students come to the front? We want to hear your views, right? And we didn't think, oh, that's racist, because that was racist against black people, and that's the norm, right? So there's really, look, I'm an economist, right? So if you want to talk about like white people's privilege in terms of income, in terms of employment, in terms of, a lot of people don't know, if you want to talk about how society has changed since apartheid, that the most recent figures show that since the end of apartheid, inequality has increased between white people and black people, right? White people are the gap between white and black has grown. So we have a society which, even though there's a majority black government, right, in all its institutions and the way it functions, perpetuates white privilege. And again, that's bigger than the discussion we have now, but you can please come and talk to me if you want to hear more about why I think that. Thanks.
Hi guys, my name is Tom. First of all, I wanted to say I think it's great that so many people actually turned out to this debate, because I half expected when I came here to see a half-empty venue, so that's good on you guys, because I think this discussion is important and it concerns the whole student body. We're discussing white privilege here, so the one thing I want to raise is me, being a privileged white student, I think have the right as a student to engage in this discussion. I want to take part in this discussion. I want to help move this discussion in the right direction. So I think saying that white should take a step back is the wrong attitude towards this. I think we should come together as one and we should discuss and organize and see what we can do about this issue. Thank you.
Well, that was addressed to me, kind of, but I'll answer that. Alright. So, just because that was addressed to what I said, thank you, sound technician. What I meant at the end was that one, we as white people recognize the overwhelmingly likely truth and authenticity of black people's voices. Two, that whenever there is an opportunity cost that we might speak in the place of a black voice, that we step back. But three, that we use that assumption of authenticity and truth to engage in arguments and to understand that as a premise in the way that we develop conclusions. And four, that the role of white people is to ask black people what they want us to do. We have many resources that we can use to potentially aid, but if we choose what to do with them, who has the power still? It's very, very clear. And five, the particular power that we as white people have is in our own communities, because white communities cannot so easily disregard white voices as black voices. The best argument is one that has been thrown at me many times in the last week and a half, which is, oh, you're just a black lover, and you're developing a CV for the day when black people rule so you won't be subjugated. If that is the best response, then it shows how much power I have in that context of white discourse. And the last nice idea is the fact that when black people aren't around, it's far more likely that we as white people will see how racist some of us are, because we won't hide it anymore, because we will assume that we're in a safe space. That is a particularly powerful accountability mechanism that we have.
I just wanted to share kind of a revelation that I've had recently, that I've always been quite cognizant of white privilege, and I've always toted the byline that no matter what kind of policies are implemented against me, they'll never make up for 22 years of socialization and advantage and stuff like that. But I never would admit to guilt for that, because the byline that I'm sure you guys have heard toted out is, I had nothing to do with the oppression of black people, I wasn't even born then, and stuff like that. So people are reluctant to acknowledge getting punished for something they didn't do, but the reality is white people are getting rewarded for something that we didn't do. And I love being validated. Jess will attest to this. I like being rewarded and recognized for stuff that I've done, but I've never really interrogated the fact that I'm being rewarded for the color of my skin, and that people will eagerly be like, well, I wasn't involved in the oppression, I shouldn't be punished. You're not being punished, you're being rewarded because of your ancestors' part in the oppression. And that's just something, I'm not going to tell you guys whether you should feel guilty or not, but it's something that I've recently, this week, today, realized that I should really, I like being validated, but I like being validated for stuff that I actually did, rather than not. Yeah.
Hi guys. So mine's a question of strategic stuff, which probably goes to you guys. I just want to say thanks so much for having the time to organize. It's great. With the strategy thing, I don't know what you guys think about this, but when words like heteronormativity and discourse and the kind of critical theory words, the jargon that that people use, and I love to read that stuff. I find that stuff great. The thing is, I think, as you guys have noticed, you are preaching to most of the people that are buying into the idea. And I think if you're going to want to get the people who are going to Tenerife on a Friday night to buy into these kind of ideas, we need to use words which are just more accessible. So maybe we should start a group where we write articles or blah blah blah, but we can talk about that later. The second question, if I've got time, is just, I completely agree also on the fact that we must listen to people who are actually black and find out what they want. I think the problem in that is that a lot of the time now you're assuming that the kind of black bloc has a single view. And the problem is when I'm talking to people, my friends or people I meet, they have widely divergent views on what should happen. And so as a white person, at the end of the day, you have to choose one, and then that's your choice, and that's privilege, and I think we need to speak more about that. Cheers.
So I'm very conscious of time. Can I ask, and I know that people in undergraduate have lectures to go to, would it be okay if we ended at 10:02 and then we can take another round of questions? Is everyone cool with that and no one's going to walk out and cause disruption? Please, 10:02, like, unless it's hitting, it's not far, and then you should have left already. Okay, cool, sure. Come down, sure. Yeah. And yeah, cool. So this is the last round. Oh, wait, who?
Great
Oh, okay, well then you also. Okay.
Yeah, I'm like 4 now.
Okay, do you just want to go then? Everybody listen to the gentleman over there.
Sorry, yeah, it's just like sort of a technicality. You really have to speak out. Okay. It's just more like sort of a technicality. It's just, you sort of define racism as only being possible for someone who hasn't been oppressed. And if you define black people as people who are oppressed, then it kind of, if dictionary definitions are different, then when you leave this room and you have to discuss all this sort of stuff, it kind of creates confusion in the argument. So, I don't know, to sort of be more, to sort of assign different sort of terms for these things, rather than using the same term for people sort of interpreting them.
So, but just very quickly, basically that's the point, is if you read a lot of like very famous renowned black thinkers, it's not even a discussion for them about what racism is. They say it's about power. So this is to say, who's the one who can claim this is what racism is and other people have to develop a new term? I mean, honestly, when people talk about reverse racism, that implicitly acknowledges that regular racism is against black people. This is an attempt to try and get more white people to understand about that concept. It does cause confusion, but that's what we need to talk about.
I get that though. You sort of still come to like the big population, like we need to make this change in the big population. Most people aren't going to read all these journal articles. So, yeah.
Well, we just got to try, right?
Okay, that's our responsibility.
Who has the obligation to change? It shouldn't be the people who have always held the power who can just say, well, we've had power, so it's fine. Like, the obligation has to be on those who are in the wrong.
If we don't want to make arguments.
Sorry, can we just give space for other people?
So I've just got something that I wanted to say. In terms of moving forward, been grappling with this idea of white privilege. As Rick Turner, Alex mentioned him earlier, there's definitely a guy that we should be reading, but he alludes to this idea that grappling with white privilege is not necessarily a matter of codes and having codes to confront it, but also a lack of imagination. Slavoj Zizek, a philosopher, says, we live in a society where it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine a slight change in an economic system. And so it's because we lack imagination, we lack the ability to think of a utopian society, to think of something better. So it's not necessarily a matter of code. This isn't an actual code. Nothing noble about us being in this room. It's about coming together, and we need to think of it different ways. We need more imagination in order to break down this idea.
Hi guys, my name's Ruth. I think something that's really come to my attention in the past week or so has been the idea of transformation being a constant thing that we're aware of. And if it's not a constant thing that we're pursuing, then it breeds apathy and ignorance. And I think what we're talking about today is largely about countering that ignorance amongst white people, and that's great. But I think something else that's come to my attention is that the apathy that we see within white population in terms of student organizations. So I'm involved in a student organization. I'm actually wearing my t-shirt today. I'm not speaking on behalf of them, I'm definitely speaking on behalf of me. And something that I've realized is that in student organizations, particularly ones that are about developmental agencies, there are very, very few males, particularly white males. And so I think something that I'd really encourage as a form of action for this is that just to look at involvement in student associations. It doesn't have to be a charity one or an outreach one, but pursuing transformation in an area that you're passionate about, and males stepping up to do that particularly. And I think it's not always being about leadership, so not necessarily looking to be on the committee or the head of an organization, but to volunteer. And I think there obviously are criticisms with this idea of white guilt and having to always save people. And I think that's not what I'm encouraging. What I'm encouraging is, particularly for males, to look at their involvement in student life and to pursue transformation in that.
Hi, I'm Joseph. I just wanted to reiterate what has been said a few times, but I think some people could take away what has been said here or misconstrue a lot of what has been said here as being called to disengage, but I think it's just so important to see that we have to really engage, educate yourself more and more. That's the first thing I want to say. And second thing, I just wanted to speak to something that was said, that we should be seen at the back of marches. I completely disagree with that. I think we don't have to take a controlling stance, but we can certainly be enthusiastic. Be at the front. I want to see like high knees. There's a march on Friday. There's a march on Friday, and we should all be there definitely, and in the front and shouting. I don't think we can ever be as angry or ever understand what the oppression that's gone on in this country is, but I don't think that allows us to be less enthusiastic. I think we should all be incredibly angry, but yeah, anyways.
So that's the end of 3 very, very short remarks. Oh, sorry, yeah, you're the last one there.
Uxolo ukuthi indoda emhlophe, so ngiyaxolisa. Sanibonani? Okay, I just want to ask if math, science, or even history of film was taught in Xhosa tomorrow, who here would pass it? Okay, 1, 2, yes, Rajo. Rajo, bendicinga uzokhupha like amagama emlonyeni wam, but you didn't talk Xhosa, so I get to be the novelty. Okay, so what I wanted to say is Xhosa, or learning each other's languages, like one of the great privileges that we forget about is language. And like, if you want to get a little inkling of what it's like to be disempowered or to be in a place of struggle just in everyday moments of life, start trying to engage people in their home language. If they want it, maybe you need to ask people, I don't know, buza abantu abamnyama, like, mhlambe bazofuna ukuthetha nawe ngelwimi zabo andiyazi, ne? Mhlawumbe, ne? Singazama nje thina belungu, singazama nje kanini, yabo? But the point is that me, still, I have a whole career around being a white guy who speaks an indigenous language. That's ridiculous, man. It's a novelty that my mediocrity is my best opportunity. I don't want to be the token white guy anymore. I want more Mlungus talking closer, talking I won't say anymore, but if you want to action going forward, if you want to understand what it's like to struggle when the languages that you're being taught and having to fight and debate in is not the language you know completely, feel this empowerment, feel empathy, start to learn the languages of your brothers and sisters because they're doing it every day. Thank you.